I always feel, I've said this many times, that the problem is that many people observe a Chag superficially. I mean, it's really superficial if you think about that. Most people. I'm not in any way saying putting it down, but I would think that it'd be fabulous to get into a Chag much more into its pnimius. But so Chanukah becomes the Chanukah lights, and then of course everybody's into the latkes and sufganiyot, whatever is going on. I would think that there's much more to Chanukah, and the truth is there's much more to every Chag. In fact, the only real way to observe a Chag is to understand its pnimius. And then you're into what's called the shefa of the Chag, the real influence that the Chag is all about. And in that way, when you do the mitzvahs of that Chag, it's much greater. So there's no comparison. So that's why I thought that to speak about Chanukah in its pnimius, not just latkes, I think would be a great contribution to the ability of people to really observe the Chag. So, the question, there's a series of questions that I'd like to ask, which in many ways dramatizes what is Chanukah about, really. First idea, first question is, what is the pnimius of the Chag? I mean, other than the historical event, which we all know, right? What exactly is the pnimius of the Chag? What does it really mean? Why is there Chanukah? And why was it so great? Why did Chazal make it a fundamental holiday, Yom Tov, for Klal Yisrael? You think about it, Klal Yisrael was saved many times. I mean, the whole history of the Jews is basically either persecutions at one point, being saved at the other, right? So the question is, what's the pnimius? That's the first question. The second question is, how do Chazal know when to make a holiday? It's an interesting question. Like I say, the whole history of the Jewish people is basically either persecution or salvation, one or the other. So, if that was the case, we'd have a Chag every day. Maybe it's not a bad idea, because whatever the Chag means, food and drink and all that kind of stuff, However, obviously that can't be, because there's not many Chagim according to the Rabbanan. We have Chanukah, we have Purim, we have the fast days, we have Tisha B'Av, which is one of the fast days, and so on. But they're not many, obviously, so clearly they had to have some kind of guidelines, right? They had to know what makes a Chag and when don't you have to make it a Chag. It's an important idea. Then you have the questions of the halachas. What most people don't realize is the halachas are not arbitrary. The halachas is the continuation of the pnimius of the Chag. In other words, you'll find that there are two fundamental ideas in every Chag. There's what's called a primary historical event. There's an event which is primary. That's what kicks off the Chag. But what really happens is that Klal Yisrael has to accomplish specific spiritual tasks. Very important idea. An individual has certain spiritual tasks, tikkun, to bring the Rebbeinu back. And the Jewish people in general, as a nation, have spiritual tasks. Okay. And these tasks, you can just share it. And in any case, so the Jewish nation accomplishes these spiritual tasks. How? Because what the Rebbeinu does is he creates an event, and that event puts Klal Yisrael into a matzav nisayon. Interesting. Or some type of position or situation. And it is that situation which forces them to choose. Hopefully, the choice will be correct, and the correct choice is the tikkun itself. So the real tikkun of Klal Yisrael, in terms of the Jewish people as a nation, is a historical event. And that event is called a primary historical event, which is the primary tikkun method of that spiritual task which they have to accomplish. It's very important. I'm giving you now a formula how to evaluate every idea, every Chag. If Klal Yisrael fails, or if they succeeded and later on they failed in that very task, so then the Rebbe has to give them a second event. It's called a secondary tikkun event. Okay? And if Klal Yisrael fails that, then what, not the Rebbe, but what the Chazal do is they now give mitzvahs, midrabanan, and that is the continuity and the completion of that tikkun necessity. Got the formula? The primary tikkun event, which is the historical event. There's a secondary tikkun event, which hopefully can make up for the primary. But if that doesn't work, so then Chazal will incorporate halachas in order to continue and finish the spiritual tasks of the Jewish people. That's the formula. And you can apply that formula to every single Chag, every one. Okay? And so on. I'm going to apply it to Chanukah. And when you do apply it to Chanukah, then you are startled. Because you see you see that the story of Chanukah is a very different story than most people understand. Okay. Another question that could be asked is, why are there 8 days? Now, the historical event was because it took 4 days to get pure oil. We know that. Well, let me tell you, we know what the event was. Well, let me just say, so why is there 8 days? Also, there are mitzvahs where it says you cannot benefit from them. You only look at them, but you do not benefit from any of the oros, the menorah. Why not? Good question. Then, of course, the question is, why don't we say Hallel? Why do we want to have a Suda? We say Hallel, right? We know on Purim we have a Suda. Chanukah has no Suda. Instead, it says Hallel. The question, of course, is why. Clearly, there has to be a very important reason for that, in terms of why there is a Hallel instead of a Suda. Although I'll tell you, when you get finished with the Latkes and the Sufganiyot, maybe that is a Suda. Yeah. Who knows? I'm sure a lot of people would say, well, that's it. Anyway, so you have that. Also, why the Greek nation? You know, a lot of nations that could have forced Klal Yisrael to do different things. You know, why the Greeks? Why was this event a Greek event, so to speak? Because we know what the story is. Now, everybody's saying, well, it's arbitrary. It just happens to be the Greeks. Or is there something behind the design itself of why it has to be the Greeks? Remember, all of this is a setup, really, in a certain sense. Okay. So we have a lot of really different questions to answer, besides understanding the paradigm, the model, that Chanukah has to be something about tikkun, on a rectification, on a national level, correct? It has to be that, because that's what we know. So what was Chanukah all about? The real question you can ask is this the primary event? Whatever the spiritual task necessary, was this the primary? Or was this the secondary? Interesting. Also a question which is interesting. What does Chanukah have to do with the Menorah? If you really think about that. What does that mean? What that means really, well, we know what the event is, right? The event is that the Greeks try to force, the Greeks try to force the Jews, right? To do what? To adopt what's called Hellenism. Now, Hellenism, is what? Is basically a secularized version, or at least that's what they try to do, of Judaism. And the Greeks really wanted to remove the whole religion. That was, of course, but certainly they were trying to get the Jews to secularize Judaism. We know that. Clearly what happened was the Jews, because the Greeks were in the process of Hellenizing the entire world. In fact, historians consider Alexander, who is really what started the whole business of Greek modernizing and Hellenizing the world, they consider him the reason why the world is modern. He created this, very interesting, they consider him one of the greatest innovators in world history, because it was the Greeks that got everybody out from what's called antiquity, and it was the Greeks that started to modernize the world. You have Greek philosophy, Greek science, there's theater, literature. The Greeks were very good in many ways, and then of course you had the what do you call it,
Olympics.
The Olympics, of course. These guys were into everything. For a small nation, they were really into everything. It's imagine how far Greece has fallen. Today, when you look at Greece, it looks like the third world banana republic. A third world banana republic. That's what Greece looks like today. That's been destroyed by its debt. But Greece in its heyday was incredible. And the historians credit Alexander the Great, who died in 333 BCE. It's a long time ago. With modernizing the entire world, because if you think about it, Rome basically took Greek culture, right? That's really, Rome didn't innovate much. What Rome did do is spread Greek ideology and philosophy throughout the entire world. Rome was the delivery system, and Greece was the machadish. It means it was the discoverer, the innovator of tremendous amount of chokhmah. Even Chazal talk about the wise men of Athens. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, he took them on, which is interesting. The wise men of Athens and so on. Atuna, Chachmei Atuna, that's Athens. But in any case, so what Rome did is it was the delivery system of Greece chokhmah, you see. But anyway, so they clearly tried to either remove Judaism because they held it was, ancient, primitive and all that. And they tried to modernize that. And then the Jews who became Hellenists, because they adapted the Greek culture, they did that. They tried to modernize Judaism. And of course the story we know is it was incredibly opposed by Mattesio with the Maccabees, Yehuda Maccabee and Shimon HaMaccabee and so on. And they gave their lives for that. In a certain sense, they gave their lives. And they won. Incredible. And what they did is they won. And then after they won, and that war took a long time, wasn't over. And they won, and all of a sudden they come to the Beis Hamikdash, and of course it was completely defiled by the Greeks. And of course they found one vial of oil that can only burn one day, and it was because it was tahor, it was pure, wasn't contaminated. It still had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Anyway, but it would take 4 days to go through the Galil to purify olives. That's how long it took, and that's where they got the olives. Obviously very good quality olives and so on. 4 days there, 4 days back, 8 days. Until they got new, and of course, and so on, So therefore we say, but they didn't care. They put in 1 day and it burned for 8 days. So that's the historical event. Okay, that's fine. But is there something beyond the concept of 8 days? What I'm saying is that what looks simple to the eye has an incredible pneumius, but that pneumius is really only understood if you understand the whole landscape, the scope of Chanukah. Okay? So you have these ideas, these questions about Chanukah itself. What's really going on? And is there a process? Is there a panoramic view, a scope, right, that can tie all this together and give us a beautiful understanding of Chanukah? And the answer is yes. That's what I want to do. Okay. First thing to know is that it says that the Hashem created the world and in Bereshis, and it says that Vahi'er Vayivoka Yom Echad, right? And it was Erev, and it was Erev, evening and day and morning. Yom Echad, 1 day. And it says Vayomer Kim Yehi Or, actually it says that before, let there be light, which means until then darkness dominated, whatever that darkness is, and then it said let there be light. Fine. And that was on the first day. Rashi asks, well-known question, there are 2 types of numbers, ordinal and cardinal. A cardinal number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you remember your grammar. Who wants to remember their grammar? But anyway, an ordinal number is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, because it's order, indicates order or sequence. So therefore, the cardinal number, it says that by every other day, it says Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, it uses all ordinal numbers, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th day, and so on. But by the first day it says Yom Rishon, or Yom Echad, day one. It doesn't say Yom Rishon. So the question is why? Okay, which is a very good question. So Rashi answers that, and he says because on that day there was only one being called the Rabbi Shalom, and there wasn't anything else. So therefore Yom Echad, the day of the one. Then from the second it says second, third day, and so on. So Yom Echad means the day of the one, which means what? That there was only being, Malachim were created on the second day, and therefore it says day one, Yom Echad, Yom Shel Echad, the day of one. Okay? But you can really think about that and maybe answer also something and say this. Yom Echad not only means that it's a day of one, because it says that everything was created at the first day, except it emerged in the other days. So when everything was created, did you see how everything is separate from the Rebbeinu Shalom? Or did you see how everything emanates from God? In other words, it was really one day of one. Why? Because even though there are trillions of things created on that day, but it emerged in the following days, when you looked at it, you realized everything is part of God. Everything. The Rebbeinu Shalom gives existence to everything, so therefore everything emanates from the Rebbeinu Shalom, even after he created them. So theoretically or technically, it was really one day, the day of one, which means God, because he's really the only thing that exists. You see? And even though there is everything there, right? But since everything emanates from the Rebbeinu Shalom, really it's only one day. Because everything is sort of like it's an illusion of existence, but everything emanates from God. There's nothing independent of God. So it's still day of one. What is that concept called? When you see that everything emanates from the Rebbeinu Shalom, everything, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is behind the existence of everything, that's the or. That is the or of that pasuk. Vayom Elokim yehi or, let there be light. But what kind of light is that? That's not the light that we know, right? Photons. That light that enables us to see. No. That light means a perception. Okay? Let there be light. Let there be a perception. You ever hear the statement, somebody is describing something to you and you're trying to understand that? He says, well, do you see the light? Means, do you see the hasaga? Do you understand what's happening? Do you comprehend the concept? So that all really is the ability to comprehend, to see, to perceive, right? The fact that everything emanates from God. That's what that or is. That's called the Or Rishon, the first light. It's called the Or Hagonos, the concealed light, because God concealed that light. Okay? But the question is, when does that light happen, really? And the answer to understand that, you have to look at the end of the Torah. Okay? That light is the Messianic light. When the Mashiach comes, what he will reveal is the Bria in that perception. All of a sudden you see the totality of everything. So you see the immediate consequence, but you are able to see its ultimate cause, all the way down to its ultimate cause. That's a total view of everything. Nothing is concealed. And the Mashiach will use that, or rather that is the Messianic light. So besides being the first light and the concealed light, it is also the Messianic light, the Or Rishon or the Or Mashiach, the Or Hagonos. Very important concept. And what the Mashiach therefore does is, right now we have an understanding of the Bria, right? We understand the mitzvahs and so on, but we don't understand what does the mitzvahs have to do with the Bria. When you put on film, for instance, what does that do to creation? We don't see anything. But the Messianic light reveals everything. It shows how the mitzvahs emanate from the spiritual worlds and exactly what it does. It also, the science, it shows that all physical laws, gravity, whatever it is, right, all emanates from the spiritual world, ruchnius. This is what the Mashiach reveals. So the Mashiach doesn't reveal, in a certain sense, doesn't reveal a new Torah. He reveals the same Torah with an exponential expansion of its comprehension. Very important idea. That is the Messianic light. Okay? So that's an important idea to know. Now, where is Chanukah? Is Chanukah merumah in the Torah? Is Chanukah in any way alluded to in the Torah itself? And the answer is yes. There's a famous Ramban that says this, but you have to understand the background. It says the Nesiim, the princes of the tribe, they brought korbanos, sacrifices, when they dedicated the temple, the Mishkan, when they dedicated the Mishkan. Okay? Chanukah Sabayis. Fine. Each of the 12 brought his own korban, and as a result, and this was at the time of the dedication of the Mishkan. But Aaron, right, after the Nesiim, which is Parshas Nasoim, we did that. Aaron realized that, wait a minute, what about, why am I not bringing anything? So he had a conclusion. His conclusion was, because God has never forgiven me for my contribution to the Chet Egel. If you recall, when the Jews saw that Moshe Rabbeinu died, or they thought he would die, right? So they all came running to Aaron HaKohen, and they said, hey, you got to make us a Egel, right? Or you got to make us something that's going to help lead us to Eretz Yisrael. And of course he resisted, but they obviously threatened him with death. And he said, okay, and he took Alei Shor, which is the kamir that Moshe Rabbeinu used to raise Yosef from the Nile. He used that, he threw it into the fire, and Alei Shor means arise ox, and out came an ox, a calf, you see? So that was the Chet Egel, and it was terrible what the Jews did. It was one of the greatest national transgressions or crimes ever committed. And Aaron, obviously, by doing that, obviously it was terrible for him. So Aaron came to the conclusion that the reason why he's not asked to dedicate the temple, the Mishkan, is because the Rebbe never forgave him for the Chet Egel. And he had a tremendous chalisha, tremendous weakness. Like he's going to faint. Okay? How do you say chalisha in English? What? A downer. Now, there's got to be a better word than downer. Anybody? Not thinking.
Discouragement?
Yeah, discouragement, despondency, depression, whatever, any of those words, sadness. But chalisha is worse than, it's no different than sadness. It's
despair?
Yeah, maybe despair. What?
Faintness of heart.
Faintness of heart, okay. Despondence, yeah. I think I said that, but okay. Anyway, because he was not asked to bring it, he figured it's terrible. Why was he despondent, right? Because he got Klal Yisrael to sin, which obviously is terrible, he was one of the contributors, if not for him, there would have been no calf. So the Banshim appeared to him, and he said, no, don't be despondent, whatever. Why? Because you're lighting the menorah, and this is in Parshas Baloscha, which starts off with lighting the menorah. Your menorah will far outlast the Mishkan, and all the Beis HaMikdash. They will be destroyed, but people will still light. You see? Which means if the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash, if they're all destroyed, there's no more korbanos, right? But your lights of the menorah will go on forever, right? So obviously the question is, what do you mean go on forever? When the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdashes were destroyed, there's no menorah, right? So that's the end of the avodah service of Aaron HaKohen and all the Kohanim, right? So what did Moshe mean? So the Ramban says an incredible thing. He says, here is the allusion, or the remez, to Chanukah in the Torah. The question is, okay, sounds nice, right? It's an allusion to Chanukah, which means that obviously that the Jews are going to light a menorah, right, until the Mashiach comes. That's what the Rebbe Shem meant. It was even though the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, is no more lit, but the lighting of the menorah will continue until the end of time. And that, really energized and lifted the spirits of Aaron HaKohen. The question is, what does that mean? Hey, so what? You know what I'm saying? I mean, okay, it's nice. And what the Russian also told him is that the one who will be responsible for the lighting of this menorah by the Jewish people will be a descendant of yours, Matisyoy, Kohen Gadol, right? He will be the descendant, and therefore one of your tribe, he will be responsible for having the Jews light the menorah for all time. So in a certain sense, your descendant will restore that ritual or ceremony, whatever, of lighting the menorah. So Aaron HaKohen was mollified, he was pacified, whatever, and fine. But the question is, what does that mean? What was the real chalisha? What was the real despair or despondency of Aaron? And what was the real lifting of the spirits that the Rebbe Shem told him, because one of his descendants will be responsible to bring back the lighting of the menorah? What's really going on? Well, the truth is, there's a much greater pneumius. I've said this before. When the Jews left Egypt, it wasn't just that they left Egypt. What they had done is they had provided or accomplished the tikkun of the Bria. They rectified creation. That's what they did. Through mitzvahs and tshuva, and then mostly surim, suffering, the Jews had rectified the sin of Adam Harishon. And when they stood at Har Sinai, the mountain of Sinai, right, the sin of Adam Harishon was rectified. Therefore, the Gemara says that there were nifsika zoyama shel nachash, that the zoyama of the snake, which means the Yetzer Hara, right, ceased to influence the Jewish people. And what did that mean? Because Adam Rishon, by his sin, right, created a wherewithal with the Satan, the Malach, the Satan, had the input of the physical universe. And by going through what they did, they removed that influence of a satanic entity called a Satan, right, which is a defilement that he can control the physical universe. They had removed that in a certain sense, and they were now like Adam Rishon before the sin. Therefore, they were ready to receive the Mashiach, because we know that the Mashiach comes after the removal, or by the tikkun, by the rectification of repair of creation. And since they had done that, so therefore that event of receiving the Torah was supposed to be Messianic. If that's the case, then Moshe Rabbeinu was the Mashiach, which he was. He was really the Mashiach ben Yosef. And if that's the case, then where was the Messianic light? The answer is the Luchas Rishonos. Those first tablets that Moshe came down with, or received, that was the Or Rishon, or the Or Mashiach. In other words, that was the Torah that when you learned it, you would see the totality of all creation. Chazal allude to that when they say that if you looked at the tablets, right, you could look at it from one side and read it, but you would be able to read the second side simultaneously, and you didn't have to turn it over or whatever, because the Or Rishon is a perception or a comprehension where you can see the totality immediately. Therefore, the Luchas Rishonos was the Or Rishon. That's really what it was. It was the Messianic light, okay? Because it makes all sense. If the Jews had done the tikkun, which is the rectification of the creation, if they were not like Adam Rishon before the creation, therefore the Mashiach should have come, which he did. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu should have revealed the Or Rishon, which is the Messianic light, which he was about to do. The problem was, of course, is the Chet Egel. The Jews sinned at the golden calf, right? So what they did, therefore, is Moshe Rabbeinu, in consequence of that, had to destroy the Luchas Rishonos, the first tablets, and he therefore gave them the second tablets, which means that the rectification of creation now was foiled, and they had to start, in a certain sense, over again. Not totally, but in a great measure, they had to start over again because they sinned. Now, this is very interesting, because you realize then, and this is what Aaron realized, a profound concept. What he realized, that wait a minute, my problem, my despair, isn't that what? Is that I got the Jews to sin on a national level. because I provided them the chet, the egel, the calf, right? I created the calf for them. That's not why I'm sad. I'm sad because the Mashiach almost came. And I'm the one who contributed, right, to the impossibility of the Mashiach coming. Can you imagine what that is? You know? Let me hear something. Imagine you're doing a chet. You're about to do a chet, right? Right? And you did the chet. Let's say you did a sin, right? And all of a sudden a bas kol comes out and says, you know, Rabbi, by the way, I want to just tell you what you just did. Well, because of what you did, the Mashiach would have come now, except your sin just halted the whole process. How would you feel? Right? Right? They'd have to scrape you off the floor. Crushed. Pulverized is a better word, right? Demolished. Right? Broken. Shattered. And if you had the understanding of Aaron HaKohen, right? You know, you couldn't even scrape you off the floor. That's how bad you'd be crushed. This is what Aaron felt. That his sin of providing the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael, with the golden calf, right, wasn't merely a sin, which was terrible. What it did is it prevented, you see, it prevented the Mashiach from coming. Bad news, you see. And he was absolutely crushed, and it made sense. And he said that's why the Baruch Hashem doesn't want to give me the that's why there's no korban, you see. But there was something else that he did. So we got two bad newses here, right? One is that he contributed. He gave him the golden calf, which was terrible. They worshipped it, right? The second thing he did was he foiled the ability of Moshe Rabbeinu to Mashiach, and the Baruch Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lech raid. Lech, go raid. Go down. The Baruch Hashem should have said, Lech, go. Obviously, where are you going to go? He can't go up. He's on the mountain. He's going to go down. So what is raid? So Lech refers to the fact that, okay, go, means it's over. Raid means go down from your ability to be the Mashiach. You see, that's why you have two Lashonos there. You see, you can't be the Mashiach, Messiah. It's over with. Why? Because Klal Yisrael just worshipped the golden calf, thereby preventing them totally from experiencing this incredible comprehension. But remember when I told you a while back, the Or Mashiach isn't just a comprehension. It comes with an incredible amount of Kedusha, holiness. Because that comprehension is together with an awesome amount of spirituality, of holiness. And if you're not ready, it will kill you. Which of course is the whole thesis of why there's a whole hachana. What's happening today is really a hachana of Mashiach, of the Orishan. But the first thing that Aaron did, he realized, was that because of him, Klal Yisrael, Jewish people, transgressed a terrible sin. And it was national. The second thing is it prevented Moshe Rabbeinu from being Mashiach ben Yosef. The third thing it did, it was a pagam in the Orishan. What does that mean? It was a pagam in the Kabbalah of the Orishan. One of the important things that the Jewish people had to do at Hatmas and Torah was to accept the Torah. You see, that would have completed the rectification of creation. You see, so they accepted the Torah. Nasa v'nishma, didn't they? And it was an incredible acceptance because they said Nasa, let us do first. And then they said, then we'll check it out and understand it. There was an incredible madrega, right? Madrega means, of course, level of accomplishment, where they said, we accept the Torah, we will do it, even if we don't understand it, because that's how much we trust and love you. And then we'll read it, we'll try to understand, what it is and the rationale and so on. So that was an unbelievable acceptance, Kabbalah. You see, but Tosfos says, so then the question is, there's a medrash that says that God took the Har Sinai, mountain of Sinai, and he hovered it over the heads of the whole nation, and he said, if you don't accept the Torah, I will crush you. I will drop it, and all of you will be crushed and be buried underneath the mountain. So Tosfos says, what do you mean? It says Nasa v'nishma, that they accepted it with tremendous amount of love. And here it says that God compelled them to accept. So Tosfos answers that they accepted the written Torah. You see, but they did not accept the oral Torah. Okay? But not only the oral Torah, by doing the sin of the golden calf, what was the golden calf? The golden calf represented, or rather the chet or ego, represented the concept that besides God, God can be represented by an intermediary. Hey, wait a minute. There's no intermediary between God and the Jewish people. There's no intermediary between God and mankind. That concept of an intermediary is the concept of an avodah zarah. You see? But which aspect of the Torah reveals the truth that there is no intermediary? And the answer is the Orishim. Because the Orishim is what? Is the ability to perceive that Eined Mavadai. Besides God, there is nothing else. You see? So by thinking that you can have an intermediary, of course they didn't believe that the Egel was a god, it's nonsense. But they clearly believed that God could have an intermediary, somebody that could represent them, so to speak, and lead them. But that's false. That is a denial of the Orishim, which says there is no intermediary. When we pray in a shul, right, we pray to God. We don't pray to some intermediary, and so on. So therefore, not only was there a defect in the reception of the Torah written, that was good, but there was a defect in the reception of the oral law, but there was a defect in the reception of the Orishim. You see, bad news. So what God did, and I'm not going to go into Purim obviously, is Purim was a setup to rectify the defect, the pagam, in the refusal of Klal Yisrael to accept the Torah, oral Torah. But wait a minute, what about the Orishim? What about this Torah at a level of Pnimius? You see, what about that? That remained defected, even with Purim, rectifying the refusal or the rejection of the oral law. So what did Bar Shem do? And that's how we begin to understand. You see, so when the Bar Shem told Aaron HaKohen, well, your descendant, you will have a descendant, Matasor, Kohen Gadol, right? And he will actually do what? He will restore the Menorah, right? What God is really saying, he will rectify the fact that the Jews rejected the Messianic light. He will rectify that. So therefore, and that was really the critical thing, that Aaron was in despair. Not just that there's a chet, and not just also, but the critical idea, and therefore the Mashiach didn't come, but that he would rectify the rejection of the Orishim, that they never really accepted that concept, that God is Eined Mavadoi, there is no intermediary. And the Rebbe Hashem told Aaron HaKohen, no, don't worry about that. It will happen where there will be a correction or rectification of that mistake. And not only that, your descendant will do that, be responsible. So therefore Aaron, obviously, wow. So he felt, obviously it was incredible. And so on, the way he felt. So therefore we now realize that the primary event to bring the Mashiach and to reveal the Messianic light is Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. But wait a minute, they failed. They accepted the written law, but the oral law they didn't accept. So God had to provide a secondary historical event. That was Purim. It's another shir. But he had to also create a historical event whereby they would accept with love or totality and so on the Messianic light. What event was that? That's Chanukah. The question is, what does Chanukah have to do with this? You see. Everybody got that so far? We now have the background information in order to understand Chanukah. In other words, there's a problem now. The Bar Shem has to create a secondary historical event whereby this will be corrected. Because that is the spiritual necessity that the Jews have to do. How does Chanukah fit the bill? The answer to that is Greece. What does Greece have to do with this? Let's go back to the beginning of Bereshis. It says, Bereshis Bo Elokim, it's a Shemayim v'Haaretz. God created the earth, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was soyu, unformed, right? Voyu is empty, choshech is darkness, and tahoim, the waters on the face of the. There was darkness in the midst of the dark. There was the Spirit of God hovered in the midst of the darkness, right? And then God said, "Let there be light," where the darkness was dispelled. Now, the Medrash says that each one of these four terms, toyu, voyu, choshech, and tahoim, toyu, which means unformed, voyu means empty, choshech is darkness, and tahoim means the great abyss, refers to the four kingdoms that will enslave or persecute or subjugate the Jewish people. Now, let's zero in on the third. Choshech, darkness. Darkness, so what are the four nations? We have what? We have Babylon, we have Persia, we have Greece and Rome. So Toyu refers to who? It refers to Babylon, Bavel, right? Voyu refers to Persia. Choshech, darkness, refers to Greece. And Tahoim, the abyss, refers to Rome. Now, there's something that doesn't add up here. Greece, I don't care what you call these guys, I mean, they're secular and all that, but you can never call them darkness. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Like I say, Greece is responsible for the modernization of the entire planet. That's really who did it. Alexander the Great. Tremendous chokhmah that came out of Greece. But how could you call them darkness? That's the question. And the idea is that, wait a minute, what darkness is this? Because it says, and God said, Vayomer Elokim Yehi, let there be light. But we know that the light that Moshe said, let there be light, is the Messianic light, which you could see a totality of reality. Therefore, when you didn't have that light, right? When you had what was before the light, choshech, that choshech, symbolic, it has to refer, right, to what's called a Weltanschauung, a understanding, right, that the real principles of the universe is not God or spirituality. It's physics, it's physicality, it's teva, it's nature, right? It's nature. Nature is responsible for everything, whatever nature is, right? It's not spirituality at all. And that is the ideology of the Greeks. What the Greeks maintained, and this is really their contribution, on one side it was an incredible contribution, and the other side it was terrible for Judaism. You see, what the Greeks maintain is that the principles, the fundamental forces, the fundamental structure of the creation isn't spiritual, it is physical, it is science. You see, this is the fundamental structure of the creation, its nature. You see, and not only that, but what they were machadish also, what they innovated, which is incredible, is that you need to look for those principles. That's exactly what science does. It looks for the fundamental understanding, the foundations of the physical universe. Where does it look for it? In the physical universe itself. Teva is the name of the game, you see. So therefore that is what Greeks propose. You see, now on one side what they said was incredible. That forget about all the millions of phenomena that you see. It's all connected by simple principles, which is what the beauty of science is. And that was an incredible chiddush, you see, that nobody ever knew before. Everybody thought that all events, they're disconnected, right? Or discrete. But the Greek scientists came along and said, no, everything is united, but under physical laws. You need to look for the commonality between all events, you see, phenomena, and you will understand not only what the event is, but how to predict them and how to manipulate them. That's the incredible contribution that Greece made. But there's a mistake here. What's the mistake? Because the purpose of understanding the physical universe is to understand the spiritual universe. You notice it says a pasuk by Noach, right? It says, Yaft Elokim es Yefes, right? The God will enlarge Yefes, which is really Europe and so on. But V'yishkoin, they must dwell be'olei Shem, in the tents of Shem. What's that mean? What it means is that what Yaft is beauty, Ferris, that Europe and especially Greeks will come out with beautiful stuff. But the beautiful stuff that they come out with, which is an understanding of the nature, the true nature and fundamental understanding of creation, right? That has to be within the confines or within the boundaries of spirituality. Shem. And it has to be within the tent of Shem, which is within the belief system of Shem. You see? And therefore, when the Greeks came out with a system, right, where they divorced themselves from Ruchniya spirituality, and all they said was what? Hey, the universe it's nature, it's physical laws, it's physical principles. Forget about God, forget about Ruchniyas, right? Well, that doesn't exist. You see, you want to understand the planet, the earth, the universe? Physics, chemistry, biology. And it's true. But what they did is they cut off the connection between that understanding and the whole Jewish belief and understanding that everything emanates from the spiritual world, the Olamas, and that emanates from God Himself. And it's all Einoi Mavadoi, everything emanates. They just cut it out. Therefore, the Torah describes them as choshech, darkness, in contrast to Or, which is the Messianic light, which is a complete perception of the total reality. See how eminently logical that is? Therefore, what Greece fundamentally did is they introduced an alternate way of looking at reality. That's what they did. And they said, you want to look at reality? You want to understand reality? Forget religion. It's irrelevant. Just study the universe itself. Science, technology. That's all that's important. That's all that really exists. So what the Moshem do? Now that's beautiful, because the Greeks then held the exact opposite view than Judaism. You see? It's beautiful. So here's what the Moshem does, which is incredible. He waits till you have Babylon, Persia, fine. Now all of a sudden, he elevates Alexander the Great. This guy was incredible. This guy died when he was 33 years old. He had conquered the entire world by the time he was 33. How many people go around in this world at 33-year-olds, they don't even know what they're doing in life. And this guy had conquered the entire world, and not only Hellenized everything, he goes down in history as the guy who conquered Persia. And Persia was the greatest empire before Greece. But Alexander conquered the world, but more than that, he brought to the world a whole different way of looking at the world. Chokhmah, you see. So what the Baruch Shem did is he elevated him, and he gave him incredible success. Why? To Hellenize the entire world, which is to modernize the entire world. But what he also made sure is that Alexander would conquer Judea and try to Hellenize Judea. But wait a minute, that means there's now going to be a clash between the philosophy, the ideology, and the belief system of Greece, which is an alternate reality than Judaism, and the Jewish people. But that system, which is called Choshech, is the exact opposite of the Orishim, the Messianic light. So therefore, the Jews now an incredible nisoyim. What a historical contest. Will the Jews reject the Greek belief? Therefore, they will reaffirm the Messianic light, that it is spirituality that is behind everything. It's true that you could study science, and that is the basis of the physical universe. But that is not the ultimate basis. The ultimate basis, of course, is the Messianic light, is spirituality, and of course, the ultimate of that is God, the Rabbanu Shalom, Einod Mavadoi. And there you are, this is the battle. will the Jews reject or not? Now many Jews, what's called Misyavnim, they accepted the Greek. The Greek, you have to remember that what the Greeks offered was very attractive, and so on. But fundamentally, Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, he got up and he said, no way, Christ's crazy? So he rejected it, and not only that, but he went to war with these guys. And the truth is, that's incredible, that he went to war. So Matisyahu Kohen Gadol rejected the Greek ideology, and that's really what the whole contest was, okay? Thereby rectifying the Messianic light. And he brought it to Klal Yisrael, and ultimately Klal Yisrael did what? They accepted it, you see. And what did Matisyahu do? He fought them. And what did he say? It was two belief systems that clashed. That's really what Chanukah is all about. Is the world run by Teva, nature? And it has nothing to do with religion. In fact, there is no religion. Or is the world run by God and all the spiritual structure that he has? And therefore, the real study that a person has to do, okay, is understand this and therefore worship the Rabbanu Shalom, and so on. And this was the contest, and the Jews succeeded. Now, what the Rabbanu Shalom did then was an incredible thing, you see. Because the Jews succeeded, and therefore they brought a tikkun to the Orishon, to the Messianic light. That was the tikkun. So the whole miracle of Chanukah really is what? Is a tikkun for the rejection of the Orishon, or the Messianic light, the Or Mashiach. So it was a secondary historical event that did it. Now, what's interesting is this, is that the truth is that how in the world did the Jews win this war? The historians estimate that there was only about 10,000 Jews that fought the Greeks. Yeah, but the Greeks had a massive army. What was the army? The army had over 110,000 warriors. These guys were battle hardened. These guys weren't regular guys. These guys had fought their way to Judea. They were experts. Yet the Rabbanu Shalom did that. He allowed the Jews to have a victory over the Greeks, which was unheard of. But why? Because imagine if you had walked over to a general, right, of the Greeks, and you said to him, well, the Jews are going to fight you. They only got 10,000 guys. You think they'll win? What would the general have said? What, are you crazy? No way. The Jews are not fighters. And not only that, 10,000 battle-hardened guys, right? That's what he would have said. And he would have been right. According to the Greek philosophy, that you have to look at military strategies. If you look at military history, this is what happens, But since the Jews had fought, and that's one of the Nisim, and what was the whole purpose of the fight is to declare that God runs history, not man. Well, if God runs history, it's no big deal for him to give the victory to the Jews. So it's Midah Keneged Midah. It's not that God gave victory to the Jews. It was a Midah Keneged Midah, a measure for measure. Since you believe that I am the one that controls the events of history, right? And therefore, to me, I don't care who you are, and I don't care what they are. If I want, I can give the victory to 10,000 people, right? And take away the victory, bring defeat to 100,000, 110,000 army. That's measure for measure. What you think about is incredible. Okay? So that explains the victory and why why he was resurrected, so to speak, rejuvenated, because he realized that the Messianic light that he contributed to its defeat, one of his descendants would now bring it back. But now here's the problem. Nobody realized what happened. What happened? There was a tikkun of the Or Mashiach. There was a rectification of the defect that Klal Yisrael did in receiving the Torah. They didn't know what they did, right? They don't know. So Rabbanu Shalom said, right? So you got to send them what? You got to send them a telegram, right? But the problem was there was no, not Western. Who's the telegram? Western Union. There was no Western Union in those days. That's presented a mighty problem. So what the Rabbanu Shalom obviously said is, I don't need Western Union. Here's what I'll do. I will take the very keli, the vessel, that represents the Messianic light in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash, which is the Menorah. And I will allow the Jews to rekindle that Menorah. Now, if that represents the Messianic light, the Chochmah of the Or Mashiach, right? So if I allow them to rekindle that, they will immediately realize, wait a minute, that means we rekindled, or the tikkun of the Or Mashiach. You see, so the concept of the Menorah is really how the Moshe communicated to Klal Yisrael what the effect was of the war. You see, so what the Moshe did, he caused it to be one vial, okay, and of course the Jews sent away, and then they came back and so on, and it burned for 8 days. So what the Jews realized is that the Menorah, which symbolized the Messianic light, the 7-branch candelabra, which represents the 7 spheres, okay, whatever, that the Chochmah, the wisdom of the spheres, which is the entire universe, and so on, the entire Chochmah of the entire creation, unless you get the Bina, which is the wisdom of Olam Haba and so on. But in any case, you have the Menorah represents symbolically the Messianic light. So they realized, the Chazal realized that if there's a miracle in this particular vessel, component of the Beis HaMikdash, that means that we had to have done an incredible tikkun in the Menorah, in the Messianic light. And that's why the Menorah lighting became the fundamental mitzvah of Chanukah. You see, once you understand this, you understand many things about Chanukah. Okay, but what was the problem? The problem was this, is that the Jews had succeeded. In other words, if you had walking over to a scientist and said, wait a minute, we have one vial of oil, but it's going to take 8 days to get the rest. You think we should light this and it'll burn 8 days? So the guy would have said, are you crazy? 1 day of oil will only burn 1 day. But if you asked, but according to the old Messianic light, then what gives the properties of nature or the physical universe to do what it does? It is God. It's not physics. The whole physics is dependent on the Bereshit. You see? So if he wants, he can make 1 day of oil burn 8 days. No problem for him. So that again is the Midah Keneged Midah. Because the Jews in the victory, measure for measure, because the Jews, by fighting the Greeks, believed that it is God who controls not only human events, but physical events, nature, right? The laws of the universe. Therefore, God said, measure for measure, I will allow 1 day's worth of oil to burn for 8 days. Because you believe it is I that causes this, not the physical laws of nature, which is what the Greeks say. And there's a famous story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, where it was a Erev Shabbos, and the daughter came over to him and she said, we only have vinegar, we don't have any oil, we ran out of oil. So he said to her, well, what's the problem? Well, I can't burn vinegar. You put in we need to have Shabbos lights. I put in vinegar, it's not going to burn. So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, well, what's the problem? What do you mean, what's the problem? It's not going to burn. So he said, well, you understand something. Oil doesn't burn because there's something inherent in the oil. Oil burns combustible because that's the command of God. Yeah, there's a physics behind it, whatever, the shape of the molecules or whatever. But in the end, why should this shape of the molecule mean that it's combustible? Who cares? Scientists don't know the ultimate reason. They can just identify what seems to be an indicator. Well, if a molecule is shaped this way, it's going to be combustible. And if not, not. But wait a minute. Why is it in the shape of this molecule it'll burn? Nobody knows why. So he said, the fact that if the molecule is shaped this way and is combustible, that's the order of God. And therefore the vinegar will burn. And guess what? She put the vinegar in, and it burnt the whole Shabbos. It didn't even go out. And by the way, he duplicated the whole Ness of Chanukah. It's not just that 1 day burnt 1 day, and instead it burnt 8 days. He got something that didn't even burn to burn the whole Shabbos. You know, I mean, I was reading the Nes of Chanukah at just who Chanukah ben Doisa was. And anyway, but anyway, in any case, so therefore they did that, and therefore even the Menorah was a measure for measure. I'm trying to show you the connection.
Why
So
did you burn 8 days? You could show the same.
Wait, you gotta wait. Wait, we gotta wait. Patience, said the doctor. I need more. Anyway, here was the problem. What was the problem? The problem was this, is that this meant, this was an attempt to bring the Mashiach, what's called Achishena. Because the Jews can bring the Mashiach through merit, you see. Or the Mashiach comes at the end time. In other words, the Mashiach must come. There's a time when he must come. But hopefully Klal will bring him through merit. The problem is that the war with the Greeks and the whole concept of Chanukah was that it brought the whole concept of Mashiach through merit, not because of the end time. That would mean that they have to be perfect. If anything goes awry or wrong, it won't come. So what happened? The problem was the Hashmonaim, who was the family, of course, of Matisioi Kohen Gadol, Yudah Maccabee of all the Maccabees. What they should have done is they should have relinquished, right? They should have relinquished the control and the kingship of Klal Yisrael. But they didn't. They refused to allow somebody from the tribe of Yehuda, you see, David HaMelech, to be a king. But it's forbidden, because it says, Le'sos shevet me Yehuda, that the only ones who can rule Klal Yisrael as a king has to be a descendant, a Davidic and a descendant from the house of David HaMelech. But a Hashmonaim, a Kohanim, you can't rule, and they refuse to get off the seat or the throne. So ultimately, the Rebbe Hashem destroyed them. You know, the last one he destroyed. You know, and it's funny because he married. Who was the last one from the house of the Hashmonaim? I don't recall, but anyway, this person. Anyway, so he was destroyed, and Herod took over. Hurdas took over, and he married to gain legitimacy, because he was really the son of a Ger, Edomite Ger. So in order to gain legitimacy, he married the last descendant of the Hashmonaim. You know, in order to gain legitimacy, that he could be a ruler. You see the Hashmonaim, right? Because he married the last descendant. Her name was Miriam, if I recall. Anyway, so she said no way, and she went to the roof, threw herself off the roof, and so therefore his wife committed suicide. So that took away his legitimacy. Didn't matter. But in order to make sure that everybody would think she's still alive in a certain way, he took her and he put her in honey to preserve her body. Maybe that's why some men call their wives honey. But anyway. But the chet was that the Hashmonaim should have relinquished the throne. They didn't. So what that did is it destroyed the ability of the Mashiach to come. And I always wonder, because the whole Nes of Chanukah happened in approximately 165 or 164 BCE, because Alexander died in 33. And then his kingdom was split, Greece. The Greek Empire was split into 4 different generals. The one who took over the Judea was, of course, Antiochus Epiphanes. He took it over. And this whole Chanukah event occurred in 165 BCE. It's a long time ago. And the interesting thing is that I find is that Rome fought with Carthage. Rome became a republic. They overthrew the Etruscans in 525 BCE, and they became a republic, Rome. And Rome, began to grow. But there was another empire that grew simultaneous with Rome, and that was Carthage, which I think is, I'm not sure, I think it's Tunisia. I think it was Tunisia, North Africa, Carthage. And they fought 3 wars. They called the Punic Wars, okay? And Rome fought them 3 times, 1, 2, and the 3rd war was in 148 BCE, okay? And I always say to myself, and that was Rome, and once Rome destroyed Carthage, they utterly annihilated the whole empire of Carthage. Part of Carthage, if I recall correctly, was Attila the Hun. That's famous. We took a whole bunch of elephants over the Alps. But anyway, that's all, famous history and so on, ancient history. But they utterly destroyed Carthage, and therefore Rome became the greatest empire, the superpower, and that gave them the ability to destroy Klal Yisrael, to destroy the temple, Beis Hamikdash. What was the determining factor? That they destroyed Carthage. But it's interesting. How did they do that? And I always believed that because Klal Yisrael, right, they never gave up the throne, so therefore the Roshim said, you don't want to give up the throne to a descendant of David HaMelech, therefore Mashiach cannot come because of that. The Hashmonaim prevented the coming of the Mashiach, and as a result of that, I will elevate Rome, that will of course ultimately destroy you. And therefore I will now create the possibility of having a fourth Golus, which is called Rome, because they refused to bring the Mashiach under the Greek dominion. Anyway, it's interesting. And by the way, this answers the question, which I might as well bring. Why is there no Masechta Chanukah? Why is there no Maseches Chanukah? Ever wonder? Every Yom Tov has a Maseches. Think about that. Which is why Chanukah doesn't. So what the Rabbi did is he dispersed the laws of Chanukah through the Mishnayos, and then Rav Ashi, it's in the Gemaras, and famous Gemara of course is Gemara on Shabbos by Chanukah, by Memadlikim. And the answer to that is, so you could think that, well, the reason why he did that, because he got revenge. These guys never gave, Rebbe was a descendant from the house of David, and they never gave the throne back, so I'll get revenge on these guys. I'm not going to honor the Hashmonaim, right? Because Chanukah is all about the Hashmonaim. I'm not going to honor them, I'm not going to have a Maseches of Chanukah. Of course, you still have to have the halachas, because then how do you observe it? But I'm not going to give them the honor of having a Maseches dedicated to Chanukah, because I'll get revenge. But the answer is no. It has nothing to do with revenge. The reason why is because the Hashmonaim, it's not that they didn't relinquish the throne, which is true. It's because by not relinquishing the throne, they destroyed an opportunity of the Mashiach to come as a merit. And therefore he said, I will not give them the Maseches, which is interesting. It answers that question of why. Because that what they did is basically what Aaron HaKohen did. That's why he had such a chalisha, because they destroyed Klal Yisrael, because the Mashiach could have come. And because we did not relinquish the throne and did not give it to somebody from the house of David HaMelech, they destroyed that opportunity, and therefore the Rebbe Shem created the fourth Klippa, or the fourth Ummah, nation, which is called Rome, to become, which is Esav, became Edom, Edom became Rome, and of course Rome became Christianity, and Christianity is Western civilization, because that is Esav, or that is Edom. That was a result of the failure to bring Mashiach after Chanukah. Anyway, so therefore we now have a whole different understanding of what Chanukah is. And really this answers the questions that I asked. What is the premise of Chanukah? The real premise of Chanukah is to address the problem that that because of Aaron HaKohen, they rejected the Orishon, the Messianic light. And therefore they need a tikkun, they need a rectification of rejecting that part of the oral law. And therefore God set up a secondary event whereby that, and that event of course is Chanukah, which they did. Okay. Why are there now? But here's the problem. Obviously there was not a full tikkun. Why? Because the Jew, like I say, Hashmonaim refused to get off the seat of kingship, and therefore the Jews did not bring the Mashiach, and therefore the Orishon, the Messianic light, is not revealed. So what do? So that we now understand what the Chazal did. So they said, okay, the primary event, which was Matan Torah, giving of the Torah, failed. The secondary event, which is called Chanukah, failed. So the Chazal said, okay, who's got to take up the battle? We do. So what they did is they created halachas, you see. And when we do the halachas, we complete the tikkun. That's what the mitzvahs really are. When we light the menorah, you see, and we light it because of the miracle of Chanukah, but especially because of what Chanukah says, the belief of the Messianic light, that there is God, He's the only Einay Mevadoi. We actually complete the tikkun itself. It's done through the mitzvahs. And that is the secret of many halachas, you see, that happen either from the Torah or from the rabbis, the Chazal. You see? Now, if we understand that, we also understand the questions that I asked. We understand what the pnimius is, to address the defect in receiving the Torah. Second question, why 8? Well, we know historically because it took 8 days. But really, as the Maharal says, 8 is a number which always indicates beyond Teva, beyond the natural order, right? And since the whole essential idea of Chanukah is the Messianic light, the Messianic light is beyond natural order. It reveals that what's behind natural order, science, is religion. It's the belief of one God, that everything emanates from Him. You see, that's why it's 8. Got it? Because 8 is that number that reflects that. Why is it you can't benefit from the Chanukah lights, but you can look at them? Because the whole concept of those lights don't represent light, where you can benefit from the light, its photons, where you could see something. Those lights represent a conception, a perception or comprehension, it's a hasaga, you see, of the Messianic light, that God is behind everything. So therefore you can't benefit from that light. It's only there, it symbolizes a perception. So you can't benefit from that, you see. Why is Chanukah Hodar? It has to be where you have to beautify it, because the Messianic light is the beauty, is Tiferes of the whole Chochmah of the Torah. So therefore the lights that represent the Messianic light have to do that also. Let's see. How did Chazal know to make a Chanukah? Because Chazal will only decree, make a takana, to observe a holiday if it creates a new tikkun, rectification. When the Jews are persecuted and they're saved, there's no new tikkun that comes about. It's just the Jews were saved. But Chanukah was a new or. It was a new rectification, right, that never happened before, of the whole concept of the failed Messianic attempt by Matan Torah. So Chazal said, since that is a new tikkun, we need to make a holiday and celebrate, because that's a milestone in Jewish history. That's what they do, you see. And so on. What's important also to know, which is interesting, is that Chanukah always falls out in Kislev, okay? And then also it falls out in Teves. Half of Chanukah is in Teves, always like that, right? Teves is the month of Esav, when he has a certain hashpah, a certain influence, Esav himself. The astronomical sign of Teves, and also astrological, is the goat, Seir, Capricorn, the goat. And a Seir is Har Seir, represents Esav. Therefore, Chanukah defies Esav. Interesting. And that's why the 25th day of Kislev is Chanukah, and the 25th day of December, which always comes in Chanukah, right, is Christmas, which is Edom. Christianity took over the task of Rome, which became Western civilization. So therefore, Christianity, which is the holidays celebrate December 25th, right, always falls basically on Chanukah. And they're both 25th, you see. In fact, what is interesting, which fits very well with my whole thesis about Trump, right, is that he always comes in, right? Is the first day of Chanukah, the 25th of Kislev, which is Saturday night, which is Shabbos, is the first day of Christmas. And if you know that, December 25th, Christmas, is the same day as Chanukah, the 25th day of Kislev. Because December, the dates of December correspond exactly to the dates of Kislev. If you remember that. Therefore, it's interesting that the Chanukah, which is the tikkun, right, of the light in many ways of Esav, right, will happen on the same night as in total rejection of that theology or that belief system. Interesting. And it happens in the year, like I said, that Trump will matar Edom. Okay, you can add that or not. Anyway, but it's just interesting that they exactly coincide. Most of the time they don't. But the kind of concept of Chanukah is to undo the nation or the influence of Edom. You see, because Edom, remember, Edom, what's the relation between Edom, Rome, and Greece? Remember, Rome took over the ideology of Greece and spread it, delivered it throughout the entire world. So really, Rome is the bearer of Greek civilization. Therefore, our contest is not just with Greece, it's with Rome. Not only as Rome itself, but the problem is Rome spread the ideology, okay, of Greek culture throughout the world. So therefore, Chanukah is always opposed to the Roman ideology, which of course ultimately is Christianity. You know, and then there's a couple of interesting ramazim. If you take a look, if you count them bracious, what's the you count 25 words? The 25th word is Chanukah. I mean, not Chanukah, what am I talking about? Is Or. Yes? Count it. Or, so the Or of the Torah, the remez of that will be 25, which is the 25th of Kislev. It's an interesting remez, you know, and so on. Also, the 25th stop of the Jews in the Midbar was Chashmoina. Chashmoina. So if you look at the Oisios of Chashmoina, you can spell Shemen Aleph Echad Ches Yom. You know? Actually, yeah, Chashmonoim is Shemen Echad, one light, means only enough light for one day. Ches Yom, it'll burn for 8. That's actually merumas in the word Chashmonoim. Interesting. And the 25th stop was Chashmoina. A lot of interesting. And then I'll tell you another remez, which is very interesting, because there's dreidel, right? You pay dreidel and so on. I mean, interesting is how dreidel originated and so on and so forth, you know. But really, when you pay dreidel, you know, it turns round and round, which means that you're utterly confused about the belief system. Then it stops and says, nope, there's only one belief system, and that is Judaism, right? But if you look at the Oisios, Nun Gimel Hey Shin, what does that stand for? Nes Gadol HaYasham, right? A great miracle happened there, yes? And Nun Gimel Hey Shin, the Gematria is 358, which is Gematria Mashiach. So I once gave a shiur, this Chanukah shiur, you know, some guy walks over to me, an Israeli, right? And he says, wait a minute, not so fast, right? In Israel, we don't say Sham, we say Po. Nes Gadol Hoya Po, a great miracle happened, Po here, right? And that's where it happened. Then what do you got to say about that, right? And I looked at the guy, but I have to tell you, the Rebbe was kind to me. I instantly had the answer. It was incredible how quick I had the answer, and it was just like, you know. I said, wait a minute, what's the gematria of Nun Gimel Hey Pei? 138. 138 is the same gematria as Semach. Es Semach David, right? That's Mashiach. Who is the offspring of David? It's not referring to David. It's the Mashiach. So Tzemach is Gematria Mashiach, Tzemach, and therefore Nes Gadol Hoya Po, Nun Gimel Hey Pei, is also Gematria Tzemach, which is the Mashiach. I found that was fascinating, you know. God was kind to me, what can I tell you, you know. But anyway, so therefore we see there's a lot of ideas and ramazim and so on and so forth. But the critical idea is what Chanukah really represents. And it is our job to complete the tikkun, to rectify. But what's the essential rectification? Is that the Or Rishon, or the Or Mashiach, right, that the Jews had a defect in receiving, accepting that belief of Torah. That behind science and the whole physical universe, there are the spiritual universes. But behind that, everything emanates from God. Einoid Mavadoy. You see, and that's something that we continue to believe in, and we continue to do by having the lights of Chanukah. And that's why you can't benefit from them. You have to look at them. And this then is why Aaron HaKohen was uplifted. He says, what's great? Because I caused the terrible failure of the Mashiach to come, which is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? But one of my descendants will rectify that. And that's what the Moshe told him. Don't worry, I realize that you did tremendous tshuva, which obviously he did. I'm talking about Aaron HaKohen, and therefore I will give you a chance through your descendant to undo the damage that you've done. And Aaron HaKohen was incredibly uplifted, you see. So it's interesting, the whole Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, right? Yet the Menorah lasts, and it's a token to Aaron HaKohen to continue that process, So therefore we now have an understanding, and I've gone through the questions, many ideas of what Chanukah is. And therefore, we understand the fundamental model that there are spiritual necessities that Klal Yisrael has to do on an individual level and on a national level. And usually what happens is the spiritual task that Jews have to do is done through what's called the historical event, the primary. But what happens if they fail? Then there's a secondary event. And therefore Chanukah was a secondary event, and so was Purim, by the way. And if they fail on that, then we complete the event through the mitzvahs itself. And that's why every mitzvah, if you ever want to know the pnimius of a Yom Tov, of a holiday, just look at the mitzvah, because that mitzvah has to come out, emerge from the necessity of that idea, of the pnimius of the day, the true meaning of the holiday. And now we understand why you say Hallel and not eat. Because on Purim, of course, we know Haman wanted to destroy the Jews physically, right? So therefore we have a Suda, which is a physical, not only are we not dead, we're eating and celebrating. So the physical Suda is a refutation of death that Haman wanted to decree. But Hallel, we give thanks, is what? Is a spiritual recognition, right? We praise God for the incredible Hasaga, the rectification of the Messianic light. And therefore there was Greeks didn't want to kill the Jews. That was not on their mind. They just wanted to alter their belief system, you see. And therefore we say Hallel as thanks, right? Because the benefit or the task that the Jews fulfilled is spiritual, not physical. And therefore we give thanks through Hallel, because they have to give thanks in some way. So we do it through Hallel. In any case, this idea of what Chanukah really is answers really all the questions, and what's important is that this model can be used for every other Yom Tov, and every Yom Tov has a whole shir, which I give, connected. So this is really what the pnimius of Chanukah is. Okay, next week is Chanukah, but I asked the people, do you want to shir? Because what happens on Chanukah is always a party. Everybody, it's family time. It's like the Jewish Thanksgiving. Where everybody gets together, which is really tremendous, because it's all Persume Nisa, obviously, and so on, So the second Shabbos, there won't be a shir, because I'm having a party, in that sense, and none of you are invited. No, I'm joking around, because I give shit that. But, except, of course, if you bring the latkes. But anyway, next week, you guys want to shir? What's the story here? I don't know, maybe some guys can't do it because that's when they have their mesiba. Yes? Is the answer yes? Okay. So next week we'll return and I go back to Derech Hashem and probably a couple ideas about Trump. But I want to say one thing about Trump, by the way, because you have no idea what's going on out there. It's astounding what is happening. But I'll tell you, one has to look at this and be astounded by the power of God. You have no idea what he destroyed. One, he destroyed Obama. One, because the legacy of Obama is finished. I have to tell you, I heard the radio for a minute, and there was a guy. So one of the guys asked the guy Newt Gingrich, very bright guy, So he said to him, I understand, how will anybody know that Obama was ever president? because Trump is going to undo everything he did. So Gingrich said a gewaldige thing. He said, and he was right. The guy who asked him, how do we know? Because he's going to undo everything that Obama did. So we'll never know unless we read the textbooks that Obama was the 44th president. So he answered gewaldig. He said like this. He said, well, I'll tell you something. In the White House, the tradition is that every president has a picture on the, so we'll know that Obama was the 44th president because there's a picture of him there. But that's it. That's how we'll know. Just incredible. But so he destroyed Obama. He destroyed Hillary Clinton, right? He destroyed the Democratic Party, the liberals, those that had defiled ethics and morality and permissiveness. He destroyed them. He destroyed all the liberals, those guys who follow that shita. You see, and they're all going wild. They don't know what to do with themselves. They're in complete denial. And he also destroyed the media, because Trump doesn't even bother with the media. He tweets directly to the American people. What the Moshe did is he destroyed the anti-Torah party. That's what he did. In one shot. And really what you're looking at is a complete mahapecha. You don't realize it's not just Trump won. It's a mahapecha on an anti-Torah party at every level. That is Messianic. That's what he did. And I wanted to emphasize that. We're not talking about the election of a man. We're talking about the overthrow, the dissolution, the annihilation of a party which is anti-Torah, because they are terrible in terms of the permissiveness and all the other stuff that they do, the way they govern and all that, of what they've done to the ethics and morality of religion and so on. And Hillary, whatever, she would have appointed a new Supreme Court guy, would have been a liberal, and that would have meant terrible in the Zionists for religion in general across the United States. And the Baruch Hashem just knocked them out in one shot. Just show that you have to say that, because you have to mekadesh Shem Shemayim. You need to know when God does something. I mean, he does something every instant. But you need to be able to look at an event and say, right, this can only be from the Baruch Hashem. And that's really what happened. It's a Kiddush Hashem, what he did. And it's just beyond belief how in one shot he knocked out 5 different enemy contenders of the Jewish people. You see. And this is truly Messianic. And we just await. So I had to say that, forgive me, as an addendum to Chanukah. But actually, it is really Chanukah, because my feeling is that what you're really looking at is not Achishena, is Be'itoi. I feel that we have arrived at the end, which means that the Mashiach will come shortly. And this is the beginning, as I said, of the Tahar of Edom. It is the purification of Esav, Edom, Rome, Christianity and Western civilization, and that is the Toiv Sheba Esav, and hopefully we'll see the Mashiach maybe before Hanukkah. Thank you. Okay. I just want to say one thing, which I just want to say one thing, which was a thought that I have, is that Monday, December 19th, which is Yutes Kislev, by the way. I don't know if you realize that. A lot of very important things with Lubavitch and Balatanya and so on happened. I think the Mizvich Maggid's Yotzeit, somebody told me, and so on, whatever. But Yutes, this December 19th, which is Yutes Kislev, is very critical, I feel. Why? Because that is the day that the Electoral College would get together, vote for Trump, and he will be legally the president-elect. And that...
He wasn't elected yet?
No. That's what you need the Electoral College to second it. That's why everybody's wanting to vote, because they can chaperine, as they say.
Yutes is good, it's Yom Tov.
Yutes is Yom Tov, exactly, right? But you don't realize what that means. That means on Monday, when they officially, that means it's legally and constitutionally binding, which means you cannot overthrow the guy. It's over with, recounts, it doesn't make a difference. Anyway, it even failed on the recount, which is incredible, But that itself has to be a tremendous milestone in this whole Messianic process. So let's see what happens after December 19th. Fail
on the recount. The recount showed more.
That more, yeah, with and so on. I mean, So she came out having egg on her face, Jill Stein. But anyway, the main idea is that, so therefore, that is not stam. The fact that he will become legally the president-elect of the United States is very significant, because that's a significant step in the whole Messianic approach, which I believe has now started with the election of Trump, which is the whole purification of the Tov Shebe'esav, as I mentioned, and tighten your seatbelts. Thank you.